Jeff, I got to say,
Greg, so
I got to say, Jeff, I am impressed by your energy you have on the day after a long weekend. I'm very impressed.
yeah, so those of you not in the United States, we had a Monday off. The rest of the world calls these things bank holidays, I guess, or at least our friends in the UK do. But we had a wonderful Monday off. It was Memorial Day here in the US. It's a time, well, a lot of people pull their grills out after a cold winter, but really it's a time to be thankful for those that have served us well over the years in our armed forces and paid the price for us. And we're grateful for them and for their sacrifice. But Greg, I hope you had a nice weekend. How was it? Did you do anything fun?
It was good. No, we did a little gardening. That's about it. We didn't
Nice.
do
Now,
anything too
gardening
exciting.
as in cleaning up the front yard or gardening as in peas and
No,
carrots?
getting our plantings in for the summer. So out here in Colorado, you got to start a little later than we did on the East Coast, but we got it going.
You do have to start a little bit later. In Texas, we almost have a 20 or a 12-month growing cycle down here.
Nice,
You can grow even some of those root vegetables and things we can do all winter long.
nice, and that's all about full stack observability too. When you look at gardening, totally related.
Killer transition. What is full stack observability, this thing of which you say?
Exactly. Yeah, so full stack observability, when you look at it overall and you look at the way that the industry has been shifting, going back to my career here real quick, starting out with, the mobility space in general, applications have become so fundamental for the way that businesses operate, the way consumers start to use
Yeah.
your products and interact with your businesses. And you've seen that transition, right? Back in 2007, we had the concept of there's an app for that, right? And the apps blew up. So we've gotten to a point now where user experience and performance of applications are so detrimentally critical to business success. And when you look at that, the way that the application landscape has grown, it's created that sprawling architecture that now resides across on-prem entities, cloud native applications that all have to work together. And then you also have SAP, which is a major fundamental component for any businesses to provide business related application support or objectives that they have to drive their overarching outcomes. So you
Yeah.
kind of look at it when you look at IT's job has become infinitely more difficult
It
because of
has.
the siloed approach we've had historically, where you have app development teams working, infrastructure teams supporting the infrastructure, network and security. Your SAP team is managing it. They're all running in a different silo. So when it comes down to it, you have to really be able to look at the full stack of the application, be able to see all the pieces it traverses. And one of the unique things that we like to talk about is the elements of the business transaction. So
Yeah.
that when you think about it, when you look at the teams bringing together a alignment with their business objectives, you have technologists that are looking at speeds and feeds, so how well the processor is running, how well the networks are running, and then you have the business leaders that are like asking, "Hey, our checkout is not working. What's happening?" So being able to bring that all together with a business context, so that you can see that logical flow from login, going to the dashboard, selecting products, right through checkout. This way, you have that full view that's showing you from that logical perspective, as well as that technical detail to go in and identify root cause right down the code level of the application.
You said a whole lot of things, and I think we may have left a few folks in the dust here because I don't think that a lot of people truly understand and appreciate what full stack observability really brings to the table. Because when we just use a phrase like that, it sounds very buzzwordy. I mean, it comes off as a little buzzwordy, but it is one of the few buzzwords, as I have personally learned over the past year and a half, 2 years, that has true meat behind it. Now
Yes.
let's unpack it for a second, just because into one of the many awesome things that you said, and it really had to do with the business transaction. Because a lot of people will try to say, okay, we're gonna talk about observability, and somebody rolls their eyes and they say, oh, good, another monitoring conversation.
Sounds
No,
like
it's
when I talk about full stack observability to my kids.
that's right. That's right. That's right. No, this is not your grandpa's monitoring. This is
Right.
not your father's monitoring. This isn't, we're gonna put some triggers on all the events and look and have some poor human have to look for the yellows and reds.
Right.
What full stack observability gets to, and we take it down to the business transaction, and let's just take a shopping cart. As simple as an individual on a website trying to do a thing.
Right.
And so often when that goes south, as I spent a fair amount of time with your compadre Keith Lawrence, and he says you end up in this war room where everybody's there, and everybody's goal is the metric mean time to innocence. How do I prove
Yeah.
it's not my fault? The
That's
network guys are there saying it's not my fault. The programmers are there. The database people are there, but nobody really knows, and nobody can really prove it. So in a minute or less, how does full stack observability help get rid of the dreaded war room and the meantime to innocence conversation?
Yeah, see, when you look at it from that point of view, of mean time to innocence, that's an issue that we've had in IT for many, many years. I
It
mean, it's
really
something
is.
that it's really a shift of tools, and also a shift of culture, and the way you operate. But in a minute or less, when you look at what full stack observability does, is you take that complex architecture of an application and you distill it down to an area where all teams can have the central moment of truth when they look at their application. So having that full dependency model, understanding where all the pieces that make that application work, but then bringing it up a layer by using the business transactions, so that
Yeah.
those business leaders can then have an understanding of what component of the application is failing. Is it the checkout? Is it the dashboard? Is it now leaving things, folks leaving items in the cart per se? So
Yeah.
when you
Is it an errant SQL query?
Exactly. Now, see, the thing is, though, the business leader doesn't necessarily care if it's a SQL
They could
query.
care less.
They
They
can care.
just care that somebody is getting a 2-second delay, and in this modern world, 2 seconds is death.
Exactly, and that's the area where you enable the business leader to understand. Okay, we're having an issue here that is now a relevant piece to the business. It could be, adding something to my cart, or selecting an item out of the dashboard, or booking a flight, right? But
Yeah.
then when the technologists are able to look at that, they're able to quickly distill that down from the areas that we start to provide observability, that says it is this line of code that's causing the delay, or it's this
That's right.
data call that's causing the delay. And ultimately, what that does is helps you move to a position where you could become more proactive versus reactive. Because ultimately, you're right. If I'm going to buy something and the website's taking too long, I quickly go to Google and I look up another search and I find another place to buy that same product. It's something. It's really that fundamental.
And it is that bad. And is it TikTok that has given us this no attention span, or is it just because there are so many performant websites that we just will stick around? Now, let's dissect this just a little bit more. And I'm going to use a quote that I've heard Keith say. It's a very
Sure.
smart quote, so clearly he stole it from you. But when we've talked about some different personas, we've talked about all sorts of different technical people, and you brought in the concept of, well, it really goes back to the business people. Now, the business people don't know the phrase, or even ask the question, is it an errant SQL query that is taking too long? Is it a SQL view that is, not we have a bad schema? What is it? They're not going to say those words. But when using a tool like full stack observability, what it does is, here comes your Keith quote, is it creates a common language, and common language creates common knowledge, and the common knowledge then creates common understanding. And
That's
that
right.
commonness happens across all of those personas inside of an organization, so that all of those folks, not so that somebody can just prove that they're not it, but it's so that the whole organization can line up behind the business goals, which is what every team inside of an organization should be doing. Not just, hey, I'm trying to save my networking peeps. No, we're trying to save the company, because that's
Exactly.
what's at stake here.
Yeah, exactly. Like Keith's absolutely right. It's really about providing that level of understanding across all personas, and that's including non-technical versus technical. The real idea here is that, like, when I was mentioning before about the siloed approach, and if you think about when you have an issue, you get that Sev 1 issue that pops up. Everybody piles into the war room, and you now have 100 people.
Yep.
The real benefit of full stack observability is, instead of having that 100 people, if you're automatically able to identify that the database is the issue, then the DBAs are the only ones that need to step in the room. Or if
Right.
it's an application code issue, then only the developers need to step in the room. Maybe a representative from one each of the domains, but it doesn't have to be that 100 person,
That's right.
point the finger type war room that we've had in the past. And it's really about driving those business outcomes. If your technology is not delivering the outcomes that you're driving for, then you're effectively failing the company. And when you kind of think of it from the perspective of, like, let's roll back the clock here a little bit. Back in 2008, 2009, 2010, we had the consumerization of IT. Business leaders lost faith in technologists.
I did.
Right now that pendulum has swung back the opposite direction, where technology is driving business outcomes. So it's absolutely critical to put, if you don't have a full stack observability plan today, it's really critical to put that in your plans now, because it's really about, knocking down the silos, but ultimately driving those business outcomes that the business is investing in.
Well, and Greg, there's another aspect to this and what you said is, of course, spot on, but it also speaks to a time when, without full stack observability and being able to dissect literally transactions or experiences in a dynamic way, you should never get to that point where an entire chunk is down. If you go back, and when we do here at Rackspace, I mean, we have 120,000 customers, and when a customer suffers an outage, God forbid, if they should suffer an outage, and we go back, we get them back to life, and we then take and do a root cause analysis. You never see, and they tell you, never say never. Never be 100% on one of these things, but I'm going to go 100% on this one and say what we never find is it was perfect and then it wasn't. There are signs.
Yeah.
There, you feel when an earthquake happens, there are tremors that happen ahead of time. There are signs that things are going south. And when you are watching the transactions, when you're watching the experience, and that experience starts to fail, you're able to deal with that before the earthquake.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of brings it to the scenario of how we start to provide baselining. So
Yeah.
when you think about it from what you just mentioned there, things are either on or off. That's the way it used to be. And if you use like a static threshold monitoring, and you're looking at a server, and a server, you put a static threshold of 80% that you want it to trigger an alert. But in normal usage, that app only runs at 20% utilization.
That's right.
Now, wouldn't you want to be notified if it goes up to 40?
Yeah.
Right? Or up to, in static
50,
threshold
60,
monitoring.
70. I want to know if it goes to 25 if it normally goes at 20. Am I
Exactly.
either making more money or are we in danger?
Exactly to my point. It's like something is happening that is starting to increase the CPU utilization. So the way we do things is we leverage dynamic baselining. So the
Mm.
first thing we do when we work with a customer is everything is starting to be built into a flow map, showing you all the dependencies, and then we start to baseline every single transaction that goes through. So we understand what normal usage looks like of the application. And this way, when you start to deviate from that, so if you're running at a normal 20%, you start to now uptick that. We want to start triggering health rules. This way,
Yeah.
you know that something is changing with that application. You can start to manage that app to make sure that your optimization is running as critical as possible, or best as possible. So it's not just about finding the issues. You also have to be with the mindset of optimization, as you want your apps and your user experiences are best ever. And if you look at the developers are now changing their development cycles, right? So everybody's putting in a DevOps strategy. They're putting
Yeah.
out new iterations of the code on a regular basis, adding in new cloud native services, adding in microservices. So the app is continuously changing. So having that dynamic ability to automatically baseline everything lets you know very, very quickly that something's starting to go awry. And
Yeah.
that
Now,
way,
Greg, that sounds an awful lot like you've got some machine learning going on back there, and little AI, and that's a happy buzzword, but not new to your technology.
yeah, yes, we do. We do have an AI and ML driven ability to start to identify the dependencies of the application, the baselining, but even more importantly is we have that component around pulling out those business metrics.
Yeah.
So think of monitoring of not just seeing the speeds and feeds of the application, but also seeing, the business transactions that we talked about, the logical flow through the app,
Yep.
but also what about some of those business related metrics, like what's the daily revenue run rate? What's the revenue at risk when now an application is
Mm.
starting to fail, right? So that
Yeah.
from the business perspective, you know that that's there. Or even like what's the user experience look like? So you make sure that you can see that digital experience monitoring, so that from the end user's point of view, they're getting the best possible experience that they need to be as a happy customer.
And then what I get excited about is you now no longer have The IT team and the IT team with their monitoring people, and the monitoring people creating reports that are retrospective reports, not futuristic reports, not actually live
Right.
reports. Now what you have are dashboards that are business dashboards that
Right.
business folks are spending their time in, because now they can start to play what if. We're talking about this from the context of something breaking or something going awry. But let's spin that for just a second. Let's talk about it. Maybe let's use the e-commerce, because we're all so comfortable with that and
Yeah.
exercise it more than we should. So let's say that the marketing team says, look, we're now going to put purple things on the main page. We're not going to put blue things because somebody read that purple's better. And they're going to do some experiments. So people on the East Coast of the US utilizing dynamic DNS to be able to figure out where people are coming in from, they're going to get a different experience than the folks in the West, who just so that they've got an A/B comparison. And now they can use your tooling to say, okay, based on geography or network ingress points, what is happening to the application? Because we should, if purple is really the color that drives people to buy, I'm literally making things up right now, then then we should see more action in the application and more transactions
Right.
from a geographic East Coast than we see on a geographic West Coast.
Yeah, absolutely right. And actually, a use case I hear pretty regularly is the marketing team puts out a campaign on the application, or
Yeah.
they try to drive more activity. So being able to see if people are actually using that, right? What's the uptick of the marketing campaign that came out? We even had
Yeah.
issues where a marketing campaign came out and it gave a unique code for a coupon,
Yeah.
and that code was wrong. So they started to identify that there was no usage of the coupon, and we were able to quickly identify that it was because of the wrong code there. So something
Yeah.
as relatively I'll call that relatively minor because it's a typo. It's not a system failure, but the whole gamut of it, being able to observe, you got to think about it from the mindset. It's not just about technology issues. You got design issues. You got human error that happens from the example I just gave, and you got other areas that you want to make sure that the usage is always up to date or up to snuff of what the consumers expecting. But again,
Yeah.
it's look at that from that top down approach, making sure that business objective and user experience is all supported by the elements of the full stack of the application, from app dev to infrastructure and what have you.
That's right. And when you're paying attention to the entire environment, from business rules, business expectations, all the way down to the bits and bytes, we find things that well, I was going to use the phrase that are going wrong, but the better way I think to look at that would be to say that aren't expected. Because if we're looking at things that aren't expected, then we can start to find some other interesting things. I heard Keith give this example last week, but Log4j it was a bad experience for the world, but it was a great success story for your tooling.
Yeah, that's really kind of proof to the pudding that there really needs to be that full stack view that includes security.
That's
Uh,
right.
like I was saying before, with the application landscape sprawling, your attack landscape has grown as well. To be able to include that, so the complexity of the app is not just the major piece, but you also have to be able to secure it.
Yeah. Now let's get really specific from an application point of view and talk SAP.
Cool.
Maybe you can give some visibility into the visibility you create in the SAP environment.
Yeah, so SAP is always, if you look at SAP, I mean that's a major
It's a
component of
beast.
your
It's a
top.
beast, and it's core to every company, every business.
And the one issue that I've heard, and first of all, I've worked with SAP for many years, and,
Yeah.
and the big concern I've always heard is that SAP is a black box.
Yeah.
Like, the team supporting it don't know what's happening inside the code. So we wanted to go after that and build it, take on the challenge, and we delivered. We put a product out in the market that's specific for monitoring SAP, that's been out now over 2 years. And what we did though is we built a specific agent for SAP's proprietary ABAP language, right? So
Okay.
that's one of the pieces there. And if you look at the complexity of SAP in itself, that's a challenge. So we built it. We rolled out an agent that is able to support ABAP code, but we also provide that full stack view of any application that is outside of SAP that been making an SAP call.
Mm.
So the part about it is we built it from a simplistic perspective, and we kept true to our fundamentals, right? We give you visibility, we give you the ability to see into the code of the application, identify if there's an application outside of SAP, but also bring in that business context. We built a very easy way of implementing. We have some out of the box dashboards that leverage those business transactions we talked about. So
Yeah.
we have generalized dashboards that give you the core metrics around how well SAP is performing. We have business related dashboards that do things like order to cash, procure to pay, some of the major business transactions inside of SAP. And the last thing is everyone wants to be able to monitor the HANA database or the S4 HANA database. So
Yeah.
we built specific dashboards that are geared just towards the infrastructure for that HANA database to have that dashboard for support there. So it's a very easy way to monitor, and we have some very great success stories with some very major customers leveraging our solution for SAP.
It's incredible that you can get visibility even to something that the world has traditionally said, "What's a black box? I can't tell you about it," which usually
Exactly.
means because I don't know. But
Exactly.
and the way you picked it apart is great as well, and I'll do it in reverse, and that is from the core of what's happening inside of that HANA database, these massive databases, all the way up to the application itself, and then all of the other external applications that rely on SAP and what SAP does.
Exactly.
Pretty incredible stuff. All right, Greg. So we're getting close to the end here. You've spent a fair amount of time in technology for your career. I'm going to ask you a random question. What are you excited about the future in technology?
I'm actually, you and I had a little side conversation, but I think the amount of technology that I've seen advance in my career has been absolutely astonishing.
Yeah.
I started out on mainframe, so mainframe to cloud native is pretty fascinating in my opinion. But when you look at some of the things happening with AI, especially in healthcare, where you start seeing reports where AI is able to start to detect cancer, being able to detect other illnesses that you have based on just knowledge that it's able to gain and build upon. So I'm really kind of
Mm.
excited to see where AI is going to be going.
Yeah.
And of course, when it comes down to observability, AI is a key fundamental piece because the amount of data, metrics, events, logs, traces coming through is just way overbearing that a human mind can sift through. So having that AI driven piece, and that's the part where I really think that is going to be a fascinating piece to watch. I just hope that I am still working when I see it. As you can see, I got a few years under me, so I'm if it happens in
You and
10
me both. Let's not
years,
count ourselves out quite yet.
I do look forward to that day though.
I love that answer because there is so much active transformation that's happening right now, and what's happening over inside of healthcare is fascinating. We get excited about what happens in AI, we get excited about observability, but all of that is driven from data. And in healthcare, there's some really great edge solutions. I mean, edge down to your wrists and fingers of capturing live data that you can then analyze later to really understand what's
Exactly.
happening with that one individual. And what gets really cool is it's not just about, hey, is my server running well, which is nice for a business and all, but it's better to know, are we running well?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
All right, Greg, thank you so much for being on the program today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Love to have you back.
Alrighty. Take care.
Take care. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Full stack observability. Let me tell you, if you're looking for a career, look into full stack observability. As who was it who popped in there saying he's looking for a job? Ramesh, I don't know what you do. Would you be smart to learn about how to be a full stack observability architect or engineer and help the world understand what's happening? Folks, we're back here next week. Just when you thought it wouldn't happen, it's going to happen. We're back here next Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. We did an hour later today just to give our friend in the Mountain Time Zone a little bit of a break. But we'll be back at 8:30 a.m. Central Time next week. Until then, well, let's see. Where's my little button I push so that you can see who's who and what's what? I've totally lost it. So there goes all that smooth interaction. There we are. I'd love for you to head over to rackspace.com/solve. It is where we put all of our content, these podcasts. There's all sorts of other great content. You can check it out there. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast because we're cranking out new content. I'm editing it live on iPads these days. I'm telling you about those stories in the podcast as well. So go check that out. I would love for you to do that. And until then, folks, I will see you next Tuesday morning, 8:30 a.m. Central Time for another episode of Cloud Talk Live.